And so the average patient was really taking 5 or more medications. They were going to 3 or more pharmacies every single month to deal with those medications. And the idea that one of those pharmacies was probably a mail order shipped to home pharmacy, maybe on a 90-day fill. Another was a brick and mortar pharmacy on a 30-day fill. Super unclear to the patient, when those medications were due for a new prescription from their healthcare provider. Oftentimes, multiple healthcare providers were involved. And so this idea that just the medication management aspect of what patients are facing in that situation is an enormous administrative burden.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Managing medication should not be this hard. For millions of people, it's a daily struggle. Juggling prescriptions from multiple doctors, refilling at different pharmacies, and trying to keep track of what to take and when. Copays are confusing, refill schedules don't align, and the stress of managing it all often falls on caregivers. This is not just an inconvenience, it's a crisis. Missed doses, medication errors, and the sheer administrative burden can lead to worse health outcomes and unnecessary stress for families. This is a problem Laura Jensen has spent her career tackling. Laura is the Director of Manufacturer and Provider Business Development at Amazon Pharmacy, where she worked to make pharmacy care more transparent, affordable, and accessible. Her journey began at PillPack, where she helped pioneer a model that brought the best of long-term care pharmacy into the homes of everyday patients. At Amazon Pharmacies, she built on that foundation to create a seamless, patient-centered experience that leverages technology to simplify medication management. She continues to drive innovation in healthcare, building on her deep expertise and passion for patient advocacy. In this episode, Laura shares her journey from PillPack to Amazon Pharmacy, the challenges of rebuilding pharmacy systems from the ground up, and her vision for a future where assessing medication is as easy as clicking buy now. She also opens up about how her upbringing as the daughter of a nurse shaped her perspective on healthcare and why patient advocacy is at the heart of everything she does. This is a conversation about innovation, empathy, and the power of technology to transform lives. Whether you're a healthcare professional, a caregiver, or someone who's ever struggled to manage medication, Laura's insight will inspire you. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Laura. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine.
It's so nice to finally have you here. I know we were getting a ride from Sonoma, and we definitely have a lot of conversation about your journey. And I always like to start our podcast with your journey. What helped you get to where you are today, and what influenced you to do something in healthcare?
That's such a fantastic question. That was such a fun ride too. Just think of that moment fondly, and you guys giving me a ride back from Sonoma. But, I would say that the thing that influenced me most to choose a career in healthcare and to choose a non-clinical role, I think, in healthcare, which is maybe also something relevant here. But my mother, Kathy, she was a neonatal intensive care unit nurse for 40 years at Kaiser. So if you were born a very sick or a very small baby in the Kaiser system in the East Bay, probably between 1976 and 2016, it's really likely that my mom had a hand in your care. And I think, growing up in a house with a nurse, I tend to believe that having a mother who is a nurse is a shared experience for those of us who are children of nurses. And it's also something, interestingly enough, that when I met my husband, John, his mother was a labor and delivery nurse for many, many years at UCSF. So the idea that when I met him and when he told me that, I somehow already knew the core of who I thought he was, because it is such a specific experience to have a parent who is a nurse. And specifically, a nurse that deals with sick and small babies and their parents and the sort of system that is supposed to be set up to care for them. Our refrigerator growing up was filled with photographs of holiday cards of children that I had certainly never met. But without fail, my mom received updates from these parents who, she had made a difference in their life. And, then I think having my own children, and I was blessed with two healthy girls, that was a relatively seamless experience, but nonetheless terrifying. So I can't imagine really those poor parents and going through what is ultimately such a life-changing experience of having a child, but then to have the added stress of, is this child going to survive? Are their outcomes going to be good? Are they going to be able to have a full life because of some of this difficult start? So that really, having that experience as a young person and in my household growing up, I think really, frankly, just framed up for me the human interest side of healthcare. And I don't think that I had ever intentionally said, I am going to take on sort of an ambitious role within the healthcare industry. I think I was someone who this space felt very familiar to me and felt important that there were people that I could be one of those people, but also that I could be surrounded by people who were like-minded, in that the experience of accessing care should not be difficult, that more decisions should be made with patient advocacy at the heart of them, true patient advocacy, without sort of the dim complexities of our healthcare system. And that the people like my mother who care for those people should also be armed with power and influence in order to be able to make decisions at the point of care that were really important. So I think I just followed the thread, like many people, like many young people who are coming out of college and, maybe have a business degree, or this space just felt very, very familiar to me. And I ended up joining early on the pharmaceutical industry and just being very curious about drug delivery and the role of pharma, and kind of how, frankly, how odd it seemed to me that there was sort of this role that pharma had, and depending on the type of pharmaceutical company, they played a different role in the lives of patients and healthcare providers, and really in the supply chain. And so I kind of followed the thread. My origin story, because I came over to Amazon as part of the PillPack acquisition a few years ago. But prior to that, I was with a pharmaceutical company called UCB Pharmaceuticals that really specialized. At the time, I was on the epilepsy and Parkinson's disease side of the business. And I loved working with UCB. Really a wonderful group of leaders, of people who were very focused on helping patients and families who were dealing with seizures and epilepsy. And I think did a really nice job, and they still do, of really understanding the nuance of how patients come about a diagnosis, and that can be a very diverse. That can be, someone having a traumatic brain injury or a stroke, or they had pediatric epilepsy and hasn't been resolved as they've gone through puberty and aged. And I just really loved the sort of nuanced approach that UCB took. But a few years ago, I'd say back in 2015, I was asked to sort of take a harder look at sort of the business aspect of how the pharmaceutical industry was going to market. And at the time, there were a lot of questions like, if rebates go away, what are we going to do? Or if, certain things happen in this industry, how are we going to ensure that we can still get the right therapy to the right patient at the right time that they need it for a price that they can afford? And I ended up really going deep on some of these issues and frankly becoming a little bit despondent through that process, because I've realized that in many ways, the pharmaceutical industry had become very detached from the patient's ultimate experience, and that there was very little that they could do to kind of recapture that ground. And like I said, I became kind of despondent. And so I went out on maternity leave with my second daughter at the time. I was, sitting I remember where I was sitting too. I was sitting on my sofa watching, or on Facebook, I think at the time. And I saw an ad for PillPack. And at the time, this was an ad that, I don't know if you guys remember the old PillPack ads, but it was a picture of a hand holding the pills in the packs. And what kind of resonated with me there was some brilliant group of people had figured out how to apply the principles of a long-term care pharmacy, which is really where we would see, especially, in my previous role, in pharma, where we would see kind of the best of what pharmacy could do was in a long-term care setting where they could really care for a patient. They had full eyes on what was going on. But someone had figured out how to apply the principles of a long-term care pharmacy using technology in an outpatient setting. And I really couldn't stop thinking about this. I was sort of ruminating on it. I kind of was obsessed with this idea of this being a possibility of using technology to apply the best of what we know is happening in an inpatient setting, in an outpatient setting. And so I ended up cold calling the number on the website the next day and asking to speak to the CEO, TJ Parker. He couldn't speak to me that day, but it ended up being a gentleman who is a dear friend now, Jeff Swindle, who is their chief commercial officer, their chief business officer. And Jeff spoke to me that day. And we had this wonderful conversation about what it would mean for a pharmacy to truly be able to create a customer-centric experience, and how the pharmaceutical industry might be able to invest in and help drive some of that, in terms of capabilities for that company and for patients. So, yeah, I remember where I was sitting, what I was doing, and now fast forward here, 10 years or so later, almost, we're here at Amazon trying to make that same impact.
It's interesting too. It was good to know that cold calling somebody can result in a very fun adventure and journey that is making an impact. So for those out there who don't want to, you think that cold call is not going to work, you'll prove them wrong.
I will say for those who are listening, and maybe even for some young people who are just sort of driven by curiosity, and I would say this is like a key learning for me in my career. I have so rarely experienced putting in a cold call to even a very, very influential person. And when you come with something interesting, a thoughtful approach, you're leading with curiosity, and you're potentially asking for a little bit of help, I have never been told no. It's just such a lesson for all of us. I really think that smart, capable people are able to suss out other smart, capable people and do really neat things together. So it's certainly a lesson.
Yeah. It's I know in our role here, we always do a lot of asking. And sometimes we do a cold call as well. And we do get a lot of no, but we do get a lot of yeses too. Yeah. But that's so is life. And maybe you can explain a little bit for some of us who are not familiar with PillPack. You mentioned how technology solved the challenge that in the long-term care, and how is that impacting the consumer, the work that the PillPack does.
Yeah, the original PillPack user experience, which still has a lot of the trappings of that experience today. But the idea was that, the average patient who is taking multiple medications, so a very large proportion of that customer base, that patient base, had some form of cardiometabolic condition. So diabetes, high blood pressure, things like that. And some comorbidities come along with that, even potentially respiratory and other things. And so the average patient was really taking 5 or more medications. They were going to 3 or more pharmacies every single month to deal with those medications. And the idea that one of those pharmacies was probably a mail order shipped to home pharmacy, maybe on a 90-day fill. Another was a brick and mortar pharmacy on a 30-day fill. Super unclear to the patient, when those medications were due for a new prescription from their healthcare provider. Oftentimes, multiple healthcare providers were involved. And so this idea that just the medication management aspect of why patients or what patients are facing in that situation is an enormous administrative burden, enormous, and not just for the patient, but for their family. Oftentimes, we were working with, let's say, an adult child who was trying to help their parents who were a PillPack customer, or their child who was trying to go to college far away, but really this was kind of like the tether that was tying them to their parents. So I can't really live independently because my medication management is such a pain. And so this idea that we could at PillPack take all of those medications, call their insurance company to get them all on the same, get bridge supply. So effectively get them coverage to get all of these medications on the same refill schedule. Number one, like that's a win right there. Mm-hmm. And then to really sort them and put them in these packets so that a patient would get a shipment every 30 days and it would be sorted in this beautiful way. It would have this kitted out kind of approach. And then I think just the broader understanding that you had this dashboard that had all this information, that you could share it as a patient with your care team or with your parents or with your partner or someone who is actually kind of overseeing or helping you kind of deal with some of this. That's advocacy, right? Like that's advocacy at its finest. It's I talked to my girls. I have 2 little girls. I talked to them this week about autonomy. And the need to be independent and to do things on your own. And I think there's a lot of grace in that. And the funny thing about using technology to do that is that I think in many ways, one of the things we learned at PillPack is even if we did a fantastic job with the user interface, with the technology, with all the things that we needed to do to make that experience really streamlined, even once a patient kind of clicked done, they still wanted to pick up the phone and talk to a person, a human that would say, "You did it right. What you said was going to happen is going to happen." And we as the patient, your family would trust that there was nothing else that the patient needed to do in order to get their prescription.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if I mentioned to you late last year. Early this year, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and it was, the tumor was enlarged. He ended up almost getting a kidney failure. So he's on a lot of medication. And I remember that day between my siblings, have you taken this medicine, that medication? Like there's so many different pills that he has to take in the period of one day, 5 pills at a time. And the whole day, everybody can talk is only just about medication. And I remember about the whole PillPack idea. And I was like, well, somebody bought PillPack for $1 billion, and we should organize it how PillPack organizes it. So basically, I just got a pill box and just organized the pill so that you don't have to this pill and keep opening one pill at a time. That's crazy. So that's kind of I was thinking about the advantage of PillPack. If only he had a PillPack at that time, that would make everybody's life easier.
And maybe that's such a great example. I mean, I think one of the funny things that I would receive, the feedback I would receive in the early PillPack days was it's almost as if people would hear about this solution and go, "Oh, that's so obvious."
Yeah.
And then the second thing they would say is, "Why hasn't anyone done this yet?"
Yeah.
And the truth is, and kind of back to your previous question, because the technology required to do basic things in healthcare is extraordinarily difficult to deploy. And that's why you see a lot of point solutions, but you don't see a lot of these sort of overarching revolutionary, aspects of how we can use technology to really change patients' lives and to make this whole thing easier. That's really our ambition at Amazon, is to do that. But I think that use case of, wow, this is really obvious. Why hasn't anyone done this before? It's because it's really, really hard.
Obviously, you've done well with the PillPack, and PillPack managed to entered that market large enough. And what are the things that make it work for them to get deployed? Like you're saying, it's so hard, and yet they were successful to do it.
Yeah. Well, we did take quite a bit of time once PillPack was acquired by Amazon to be very thoughtful about how we rebuilt pharmacy in the vision of Amazon Pharmacy, where PillPack was sort of the backbone and the sort of original spirit and infrastructure of a lot of that. But when really the original question was, what does that look like reimagined as an Amazon experience, which is coming with searchable, discoverable pricing that is specific to you as the patient. It's, surfacing your pricing with insurance, which is something that is still impossible to find, outside of Amazon Pharmacy. Also surfacing your information without insurance. And I think this is where, Amazon's, leadership team and John Love and Neil Lindsay and our broader leadership team have just done a fantastic job of really trying to consider, what does agency look like at every point? So if a patient really needs to walk out of that, quote, walk out of our pharmacy, or check out that day with the prescription they need, that they will understand how that's possible and to give them a path to do that instead of putting up barriers of, well, we need to do this or we need to do that. I think we all know our pharmacy experience, is meaning the previous pharmacy brick and mortar experience is very, very difficult. But yeah, I think reimagining that PillPack experience as Amazon, where there are sort of the trappings of Amazon, of an Amazon experience, like we use automatic pharmaceutical manufacturer coupons. We've just announced that we've saved our patients approximately $50 million in totality since the beginning of that program, where manufacturers are really covering the cost of their copay or their cash price. But we've embedded those coupons in a user experience that feels really familiar to a traditional Amazon experience. Whereas manufacturer coupons today, they're difficult to find. They often go unused because they're difficult to find. Even if you can find them, they're not always applied appropriately at the point of sale. Patients still don't know what they're going to pay until they get to the pharmacy counter. All of those things that we would never hold such a low bar for any other commerce experience in our life, but we still have that in pharmacy. So really, I think the technology piece to your question around, what that sort of transition looked like was really about rebuilding PillPack in the imagination of sort of what that could be on Amazon. And it still is. That's still going to continue to be how we think about this.
Yeah. And I'm going to change the topic slightly around pharmacy. You work in the pharmaceutical companies for a while, and so you obviously understand a lot of the pharmacy world with being in a PillPack at Amazon now. Help us understand, how does the pharmacy world work right now?
The pharmacy world?
Yeah. You're how does it, oftentimes
Sure.
as a consumer, I just okay, I mean, I'm a Kaiser member, so for me, I just go to Kaiser. But a lot of people who are not Kaiser member, they go to the Walgreens, the CVS, get that prescription, and then they buy their copay or no copay, or they have pre-auth. I mean, how does it work? What's behind that counter?
What's behind all of that? Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few different things. The first is there's a bunch of different organizations that, as a layperson, may or may not have even heard that these exist. So one of the more sort of obvious ones, and some folks have heard of wholesalers and the organizations that actually are in charge of selling product meaning pharmaceuticals into the pharmacy channel. And so these are organizations like McKesson and Cencora and really other companies that are purchasing product directly from pharmaceutical companies and essentially making it really easy for pharmacies to purchase product from the wholesalers. So oftentimes large pharmacies will have a couple contracts with different wholesalers where they acquire the vast majority of their pharmaceuticals. Pharmacies also have the ability to purchase product directly from pharmaceutical manufacturers. This isn't done as much As you can imagine, the reason wholesalers exist is because they make it easier for both the manufacturer and the pharmacy. And so to kind of really reimagine what that would look like in terms of a direct relationship, but it is something that is done. On the patient side, when we think about, you mentioned sort of let's say using your insurance, you're a Kaiser member. I remember, so I grew up a Kaiser patient my whole life. And I was telling one of our mutual friends the other day that I remember when I was no longer a Kaiser patient. And I remember calling my sister after seeing my doctor and saying, I can't find the pharmacy. Where's the pharmacy? And because at Kaiser, you walk downstairs and the pharmacy's in the downstairs and everyone's got your chart. And, and that's one of the wonderful things about Kaiser. But for everyone else, who is going out into the world or really potentially who is dealing with specialty pharmacy or sort of other things that are going on to meet their needs, what happens is pharmacies also contract with different groups called pharmacy benefit managers, which are essentially the contract organization that employers and health insurance companies use to deal with the drug formulary part of insurance. And so pharmacies negotiate to make sure that they have the proper contracts so that when you as a patient come in and you want to use your insurance to pay for your medication, that we can say, yes, we are in network or we have the ability to bill your insurance because we have those contracts. And then the pharmacy gets paid by the insurance company, patient pays their copay. But that process of making sure that you have broad ability as a pharmacy to be able to allow a patient to bring their insurance to your pharmacy, give your BIN and PCN number and all that good stuff. So Amazon Pharmacy does have broad payer coverage, and we're in network for about 98% of patients who are using their insurance for commercial and Medicare. But that is primarily the process of what it means to, be able to do those things. And then there's the cash portion. So if your insurance doesn't cover a product or a pharmaceutical, or frankly, in some cases where your copay could be higher because of the way the formulary is designed than just paying out of pocket. It's shocking to hear that, but that does happen, And so that's also one of our goals at Amazon Pharmacy is to make sure that that you have that information of, you can use your insurance to pay for this product or you can pay cash. But that's where pharmacies, some pharmacies do this, not all do, but we do, where we have special cash programs where, for example, our RX Pass program, where there's a list of a formulary of commonly prescribed of generic pharmaceuticals. About 70 million Americans would take one of the products on that list. And it's basically $6 per month if you need one of those products or if you need a lot of them. And that's a really fantastic program if you're not using your insurance. So I'd say that, when it comes to how pharmacies, purchase pharmaceuticals and then how they dispense pharmaceuticals, those are two really, really important aspects. I think the other piece here is that pharmacies, I think broadly, and I was on stage with Rick Gates from Walgreens a couple months ago and kind of been having this debate and really quite a lot of consensus around the idea that we as a pharmacy and pharmacies in general, we really want to be compensated based on the value-added services that we provide. And the idea that we're kind of in this place where we need to worry about the cost of goods, we need to worry about the sale price, like we're kind of wrapped into the, call it dysfunction of the way that the products are bought and sold, pharmaceuticals are bought and sold in the supply chain. But ideally, in an ideal situation, pharmacies just get to focus on being fantastic pharmacies and providing clinical services and customer support services that ultimately help people get and stay healthier. So really, I'd say, those are kind of the broad strokes of sort of pharmacy.
Yeah. And I was just thinking as you speak, I was thinking about how pharmacy, when I'm thinking not CVS, I guess, just trying to make it easier for me to understand is that there's regular mom and pop's pharmacy. And I assume they would buy their drugs from the wholesaler mechanism. And they'll have to worry about their supply just in time. If they buy it and nobody buy it, then that's a challenge. And I think in the world that it just feel like it's a business like any other business. And I feel like listening to what you're just saying, the PBM is trying to basically administer to make sure the pharmacy know who should get a drug, no, how much they should be charged, because based on what insurance they cover.
Yeah, they're definitely enforcing that formulary on behalf of a plan sponsor, but they're definitely the ones who are sort of dictating what needs to happen in order for a patient to get the product that they need and at what price.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes we just like, if only things can be all the same. But the challenge is there's gazillions of different drugs and there's millions of people who have different plans. So there's a lot of customization.
Yeah, I think customization, I think ultimately sort of layers and layers and layers of silo of just an industry that I know oftentimes, we in the industry say, healthcare is broken. Actually, like it was built to do what it's doing. And it's not, that piece of it is, can we simplify? I think, when we are all, our leadership team and when our groups are in a room considering what can we do to make this better, oftentimes the mental model comes down to more simplicity, more transparency. And I am someone who believes that if we can shine, or if the industry were to shine more light on answering that question of why, that there would be more agency for the people who are ultimately left holding the outcome of the decisions that are made, of patients and their families, healthcare providers who are really sitting trying to help both and not always having the tools to do that. But if that transparency were to exist, I think what you just said is could there be more simplification? Could there be more access? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, and it's easier said than done.
That's for sure.
And I feel like the challenge has always been there, and it's getting more and more as you add more complexity. I like to I was mentioning to a friend, it's almost like this, like, you start with a clean house. As you live in it, you start adding clutter. And then once in a while, you have to clean up a little bit of the clutter, but then the clutter will come, and that's how life is. And I feel like that's kind of how, in a way, healthcare, there's a lot of house cleaning that need to be done.
And for me, I live in this every day, and I choose to. But what I find is I think I know a lot. And then every day I realize that there's more and more that I have to learn, that we all have to learn. I think there's a little bit of maybe a self-consciousness for many people, especially, and really to, I think, encourage others, especially brilliant technological leaders and people who are kind of looking at a career in healthcare. There's a little bit of an insecurity around healthcare of like, oh, I don't know this space, or that sounds really hard. And the truth is, it really is. And even I often am like, wow, there's things I don't know, or there's things that I really need to learn a little bit more about. And so I think for all of us, that subject matter expertise, if we're going to try to make a meaningful change, is just taking that growth learner mentality of like, we all have something to learn here.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, life is a lot about problem solving and making impacts people life. At least that's my simplistic view of the world. You mentioned earlier about the sheer experience of being the child of a nurse, of a provider. My parents are not a healthcare provider. Help us understand, what is that experience like?
Yeah, this is a great question. I remember some of my earliest memories are of my mom, but also many of my aunties and my mother's cousins growing up were also nurses, respiratory therapists, had roles at Kaiser. And so it was her speaking on the phone with them about, an issue around a patient that they were taking care of together. It was her calling in on her days off to check on baby so-and-so. And did you get my notes? And did you see that I said X, Y, and Z? And then, oh, don't do that. We said we would, we said we wouldn't do that. And this parent didn't want this. And just this kind of almost obsessive desire to make sure that everything was managed for these little tiny babies. And then I think, seeing her at work and kind of, when you're at home and you don't really know what your parents do for a living, it's funny. I think all of us have that experience. Like, I don't know what, but when you actually see them at work, my mom was someone who, if there was garbage on the floor, she was picking it up. Like, she wasn't someone who was waiting for someone else to do that. If there was a box that needed to be, I remember her grabbing a box cutter and just like cutting down boxes because it was taking up too much room in the hallway. Mm-hmm. And she was doing that labor. It wasn't like part of her quote job description, but it was like, this needs to get done. So it's just this like incredible hard work, this work ethic. Also this constant, like the reason that she was cutting down those boxes is because patients were kind of having to walk around them in the hallway. And she's like, people don't need to, that's not acceptable. And so this constant framework around patient centricity and what it was like for a patient. So I think that there's also what comes with that is a parent who is also not pulling any punches. She's direct. She was someone who was going to, she still does this today. My mother and I adore my mom. She was not pulling any punches. It's like, this is the way that it is. And, and she's principled in her position. And it's very pragmatic in terms of, well, we need to go through this. I remember, when I left for college, my mom, I hate long goodbyes. I've always hated that. But my mom was the person who taught me to steel yourself. When you're facing a hard thing or a new challenge, you steel yourself and you just, you take that step forward. And I think that is not unique to my experience. That is unique to an experience, excuse me, of, a child who has a parent who is a nurse, especially a mom, I think. I think nurses have that quality. And frankly, meeting my mother-in-law and it's like, I was right. This is very similar just in terms of this like deep empathy, this work ethic, this desire to help people and also just extraordinary intelligence where she'd have to know enough to have high judgment of when to include a physician, when to escalate, when to act in a very high stakes environment. Because, I would visit her at work and it's one thing to kind of see, to hear about kind of what her job was, but then to see the size of these babies and to be able to, recognize that baby would probably fit in a palm of your hand. They're so fragile that the stakes here are just couldn't be higher. So I think that is certainly something that I'm sure there's probably people who are the children of nurses who are nodding their heads to this story that are listening right now because they know.
Yeah. It's funny because my neighbor who is a nurse, as you're telling the story, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly how he approached things. He get things done. And I need to clean out my garage a few years ago. And he said, Christine, I'm there to, let me know when I'll be there. And he was just,
yes.
And I was just thinking like, oh my God, that's exactly. And yeah. So one last question before I let you go. How's it like working for Amazon when you're part of the pill pack? I'm sure it's a small organization before it becomes where it is. And what changed? What are the lessons learned that you learned in working at pharmaceutical, large organization, and then pill pack part of the building the team, and then now back to the big organization again?
Yeah, I think I've had such a really privileged position where I came from the pharmaceutical industry where sort of medium and large organizations, I knew what that looked like. and then to join a startup and to have that deep camaraderie, working with a small group of really smart people who knew how to build things, really, and had hard skills around building things. But then I think, to answer your question, what's it like working at Amazon? For me, when I agreed to join the PillPack organization and start their manufacturer strategy and grow that business, my destination, at least my goal, was always an Amazon. It was always the way to make meaningful impact was at scale. And so it was to foster the idea and to grow that to grow that baby and to watch it succeed and to do everything we could because we believe so much in what we were doing. But to recognize that for me, and the reason I'm still here at Amazon is because I truly believe that an organization, I don't think there's another organization on earth that has demonstrated the ability to remain customer centric, to truly work backwards from the customer to solve huge unmet need. Otherwise, Amazon wouldn't be in the space at all because there wouldn't be an opportunity for them. But to really ask themselves, is there a large unmet need in this area? And the answer is in healthcare, 100% yes, with full heart, absolutely, there absolutely is. And so the idea that Amazon is able to apply that thinking, the mechanisms, the models, to not just source the idea, but to build the scale and build the infrastructure and build the technology and to continue to invest in that experience. To me, that is sort of the genesis of why I'm still here. And what I'm so excited about in the future. It is very different working for an Amazon than working for a startup, is probably obvious. And it really has a lot to do with that rigor, discipline around scale, which we didn't have to have when we were the size that we were, at PillPack. But now we certainly do. So all of that comes with it. It's Amazon's document writing culture is very specific to Amazon, which I think is a really interesting and wonderful way to drive the business. But it's also a very specific skill set, one that I didn't have, one that I am still actively working on developing myself and my team to get better at, because it's such a written word is such a fantastic way to bring in others and to influence and to drive an agenda forward. So there are very specific things about working for Amazon that I would say are important to recognize, are Amazonian in nature, but also I think give me confidence that this is the right company at the right time to do the things that we're doing.
Right. You mentioned about the written word, and I think I've heard that a lot about Amazon. Tell me more. What does that mean? Like everything has to be documented, presented. Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah. So we have a process around document writing where we don't, Amazon kind of famously we don't use PowerPoint. If we have an executive or a business review, we're not putting together PowerPoints to tell our story. We're putting together documents. And one of the things that we do also is called a PR FAQ, which is a press release with associated FAQs. So, and this is, something that's relatively known, but we write a 6-page document where we're essentially writing the future press release for this idea. And then the thoughtfulness around the business model and some of the sort of questions that you would need to answer in terms of building out a true business case would be answered as part of those FAQs. But doc structure and the scrutiny around how you're telling that story, and how well, you're able to convey an idea through documentation. I think it's not so much about documentation for the purpose of documentation. I think it really is about this culture of storytelling and writing, that in order to really be successful and to drive an initiative forward, you have to be good at that. You at Amazon, that's one of those sort of core ideas.
Mm-hmm. I think it makes sense to do a lot of writing so that when people read it, you read the same thing rather than hearing people say that they're presenting. I really like that.
And that's actually another thing is that we start every meeting in silence because there's no expectation of pre-reading these documents. The meeting is about reading the document and discussing it, which from time to time, I think for new people joining Amazon, that is a little bit unnerving to jump on a call and for there to be just silence for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that would be good.
Yes.
So, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story and your insight, and really enjoy our conversation. And I think a lot of people will learn from your story and your insight.
Well, thank you so much. It's just a pleasure to see you as always. But thank you for inviting me. This is great.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We hope you found the conversation insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you the latest in health innovation. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn and Twitter for updates on upcoming episodes and more. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare. I'm Christine Minato, and thank you for listening.